So, you've heard of Amazon. You know, seller of the world's things. Marketplace for all its brands. Employer of 600,000 people. And depending on how you see it, either an emblem of internet genius or the most evil corporation since this guy's. But here's the thing. The Amazon you think you know, the everything store, the Walmart of the internet, it's just a front. In reality, Amazon is increasingly both the backbone of all global commerce and of the internet itself. And the story of how that came to be also explains how a silent legal revolution has today created capitalist kings more powerful than any in history. Okay, let's rewind a century. To the early 1900s, America has become the world's leading industrial power, and its wild, wild west economy has allowed men like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Vanderbilt, all aided by banker J.P. Morgan, to amass monopolies in oil, steel, railroads. These men hold entire industries in their hands. They carve up America, dwarf its democracy, and reign as its capitalist kings. They do so despite a law, the Sherman Act, which forbids such dominance. As its author put it in 1890, if we will not endure a king as a political power, we should not endure a king over the production, transportation, and sale of the necessaries of life. You know, like, say, all the goods that everyone in the world buys? But I'm leaping ahead. Anyway, for years, the Sherman Act lies there like an unlit fuse until 1904, when President Teddy Roosevelt finally breaks up a conspiracy by Rockefeller and Morgan to control all railroads west out of Chicago. Yet he leaves the largest trusts untouched, content with having won a symbolic triumph.
As far as Teddy's concerned, it's over. But it ain't over.
It falls to a journalist, Ida Tarbell, to expose the 40-year stranglehold of Standard Oil, Rockefeller's vehicle for controlling 90% of the market.
You know there will be blood? Rockefeller was the guy that Daniel Plainview was up against.
Well, Standard offered us $1 million for the Middle Boston leases. I told H.M. Tilford where he could that.
Tarbell's expose convinces the US government to pursue Standard, and in 1911 the Supreme Court splits the mother of all monopolies into 34 pieces. American tobacco is broken up the same day.
Okay, Ida's taken out Rockefeller, but we still need to follow the money. It's time for
a young lawyer named Louis Brandeis. Now, he's going to be important. Think of him like Yoda. In a landmark book, Other People's Money and How the Bankers Use It, Brandeis lays bare how J.P. Morgan had managed, through a morass of directorships, to control 85% of the New York Stock Exchange.
JP essentially controlled the US economy.
Well, we just have to keep quiet about some of these things.
If Brandeis is Yoda, JP is like Jabba. You know what I mean? And after Yoda defeats Jabba,
Brandeis wins a seat on the Supreme Court,
where he rails against monopolies.
For Brandeis, they're not just bad for consumers,
with overpowerful trusts hiking prices, but for Americans as citizens. As he puts it, we may have democracy, or we may have wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both. This idea that no man is free if they're subject to the whim and caprice of a few self-appointed industrialists, that capitalist power has to be spread widely, takes hold over the next 50 years. As Hubert Humphrey, later a presidential nominee, puts it soon after, we're not talking about whether some penny-pinching person is able to save half a cent on a loaf of bread. We are talking about the kind of America we want. Do we want one filled with a few Frankensteins and giants?
This belief that capitalist giants can crush democracy was partly a reaction to Hitler.
By winning over the handful of barons who controlled German industry, Hitler had been able to rapidly build his Nazi state.
Frankly and definitely, there is danger ahead.
Never again, says FDR, can private power be allowed to become stronger than the democratic state itself. That, in its essence, is fascism.
In 1950, Congress passes its fourth anti-monopoly law in 60 years.
For a long time, this is the American consensus. Industrial liberty matters and goes hand in hand with strong labor unions, higher tax rates, and constraints on banking power. And it works. More money goes to workers. Banking panics don't happen. The American economy races ahead of the world. And then this guy comes along. Robert Bork. Here's Bork in 1978.
There has been an enormous acceptance of certain theories about oligopoly, about concentrated industries.
He's about to publish a book, The Antitrust Paradox, that will not only reject Brandeis' central idea that monopolies are anti-democratic, but will effectively define them out of existence.
Bertram, who are these people?
Forget the dangers of concentrated power, forget industrial liberty, forget a competitive democracy. All these, says Bork, are nothing but unarticulated social values. Only one thing matters: consumer welfare. What's that? It's when goods are created and allocated with maximum efficiency. Sounds benevolent enough, but it reduces the world to one flawed maxim. If capitalism is efficient, it's good. There are no other measures that matter.
And that's free trade.
This is a complete attack on the twinned ideas that have stood for the past 67 years. That Americans are hurt by monopolies, both as consumers and as free citizens.
How do you know they know what they're doing?
In Bork's America, there are no citizens, only buyers of efficiently made goods. And how do we know if markets are efficient? Not through competition, the traditional guarantee of cheap and plentiful stuff, but simply through low prices. If prices are low, Bork says, the market is competitive. Within a year, the Supreme Court is citing Bork's work, and 18 years later, you can say that again. Decades of antitrust acts, hailed in 1972 as the Magna Carta of American enterprise, had by 96 become as irrelevant as handlebar mustaches. How did Bork's ideas cut through when Brandeis had won?
Because people stopped crediting antitrust for the world they lived in.
In the 1970s, inflation was a major failing. Markets needed fixing.
The most serious problem that our nation has is inflation, and it's getting worse.
Low prices were the answer. And so throughout the 80s and 90s, the US government stopped suing monopolies. The message is clear, it's okay. As long as you keep the gruel cheap, you can be Jabba. And one Wall Street analyst hears that message loud and clear.